Horse trapped in mud was seconds from disaster. What happened next was incredible. The sad neigh of the horse tore through the still morning like the sharp crack of a whip. It had fallen into a pit of mud and was now stuck. It struggled to save itself, but with each effort it sank deeper into the thick, unyielding muck. Its powerful muscles soon became as weak as sticks. Suddenly there was a loud rumble of thunder. A storm was coming. Soon the thick mud would become murky enough to drown it completely. Nothing and nobody could save it. Or could they? The old beat-up truck tumbled and bounced as it flew down the road. Emma was taking a morning drive with her dog, Barker. Emma needed this drive. Months ago she had lost something very precious to her, her prized horse, Orion. Her grandfather had given her Orion as a child, and they had grown up together. She still couldn't believe her favorite horse had simply slumped and died. That morning the ache and grief felt worse, so she decided to go on this drive. But it wasn't helping. In fact, she was getting sadder, for this was the route she often took with Orion on their morning runs. Emma had on a brown bucket hat, but her forehead still glistened with sweat, and some of the droplets rolled to her eyebrows. She was about to wipe the droplets off when she heard a sound that was all too familiar, a very sad neigh. Emma slammed on the brakes immediately. Barker flew forward and jumped to her with a bark. Did she really hear that, or was her mind playing tricks on her? She looked around, but all she could see were the tweeting birds. She was about to turn away when she heard the loudest neigh she had ever heard in her life, and that was saying something, seeing that she grew up on a farm. Did you hear that? She turned to Barker, and his upright ears and tails answered her. Emma burst out of the truck with Barker on her heels. That very sad neigh sounded just like Orion had before it slumped. She turned away from the tracks she had been following and faced the large green field beside it. Where could that neigh be coming from, and why did it sound so distressed? She was still deep in thoughts when Barker let out another bark, more urgent this time, and bolted into the field. "Barker!" Emma yelled, and just as she did, she heard the loud neigh again. Emma shot into the field too, behind her dog. She ran hard deeper into the foliage until they arrived at a clump of trees. Barker didn't slow. He jumped into what looked like a meadow. Emma jumped in too, and froze in her tracks immediately. In the scene where she meets Mater, her eyes grow round like saucers. What do you think she saw? At first she couldn't fully understand what she was seeing. It looked like a clump of something chestnut lying in the middle of the field, heaving and writhing. Then it hit her. It was a horse in severe distress. The horse was trapped in mud. It looked like it was in so much pain too, but it didn't stop struggling. The mud had drowned the large animal up to its chest, and it could only shake its head and whimper. When Barker jumped in front of it, it threw its head back and let out another piercing whinny. For a moment Emma was paralyzed. That sound felt like déjà vu. Memories of Orion came rushing back, and they were so vivid and overwhelming that she felt a sharp sting of tears in her eyes. But the horse let out another whinny, and she snapped back to reality. This was not Orion, but it didn't matter. This was a life, desperate and fading before her eyes. Emma ran toward it immediately. "How did you get in there?" The horse froze at the sound of her voice and turned around. The two of them didn't move for a full second as they stared into each other's eyes. One set of eyes carried frustration and pain, the other carried pity and grief. But a sudden loud clap of thunder broke the moment, and the horse went into another frenzy. Emma flinched as the mud splattered across her jeans and a pretty blouse. Barker barked and jumped away, but neither of them left the horse. Emma scanned the area and the skies. The storm was closing in fast. She realized that if she did not get to work now, it would be too late. But there was another problem. The mud was like quicksand, and it was drowning the horse with every tussle, so she knelt at the edge of the mud, dirtying her jeans even more, and reached out slowly to the horse. She needed to calm down. "Easy now," she whispered. The horse's nostrils flared, but it did not pull away as she patted it lightly on its neck. Its coat was warm beneath her palm, and she could feel its quivering muscles. "You've got a lot of fight in you," she added. "That's good. We are going to need it." As she spoke, her gaze swept over the field, searching for anything that could help. But there were no nearby trees sturdy enough to tie a rope to, and the mud was too deep for her to pull the horse out by herself. But she was determined to try. "All right," she jumped up. "We're going to do this." The second crack of thunder sent a shiver down Emma's and the trapped horse's spine. Its eyes looked wide and terrified, and they pleaded with her in a way words could never. And just like that, the rain began to fall, just tiny and thin, icy drops that promised of an incoming harsh storm. Emma ran faster than she ever had in her life back to her truck. Of course, Barker had followed on her heels. The old Ford still sat waiting patiently. She flung open the tailgate and began rummaging through the pile of tools and supplies she always kept on hand until her fingers closed around a coil of heavy rope, an old tarp, and 2 weathered planks. "Please let this be enough," she whispered under her breath before grabbing a crowbar. When Emma reached the edge of the mud again, the horse let out a shrill, desperate whinny. It probably thought they had abandoned her. Emma dropped her supplies and crouched low. "Easy, girl. I will help you. You've got to trust me." Barker, too, circled the horse, and his bark seemed to calm the creature slightly, but Emma could see the rise and fall of its labored breaths. She worked quickly. She looped the rope around the animal's shoulders and knotted it tightly. Then she grabbed one of the planks and slid it carefully to the horse, hoping to create a solid surface for leverage. But the mud clung to the wood like a living thing, and her arms strained as she pushed it further beneath the animal's body. The horse panicked suddenly, and with its panic came the thrashing again. It thrashed violently, and its back legs sank deeper into the mire. Emma stumbled, nearly losing her balance. "Whoa!" she cried. "Easy!" A flash of lightning illuminated the meadow. The storm was nearly upon them. Emma glanced at the sky, and her lips moved in a silent prayer. She wasn't one for church or scripture, but in that moment she begged for strength, for herself, for the horse, and for the will to see this rescue through. She didn't know what else to do without spooking the horse further. She was experienced in horses enough to know that a spooked horse was a self-destructive one, but she decided to try again. Her gloves were slippery with grime as she made the ropes tighter around the horse's shoulders. Then she pulled with all her might. "Come on!" she gritted her teeth. The horse let out a deep, guttural groan, its legs shifting slightly as it tried to respond to Emma's efforts. She could feel the resistance of the mud, but she gritted her teeth and pulled even harder, her muscles aching with exertion. It didn't work. The sound of a diesel engine grumbling over the hills caught Emma's attention, and she whipped around just in time to see an old red truck crawling past the clump of trees that led to the meadow. "Wait!" she yelled at the same time. Barker barked. The vehicle skidded to a halt, and a confused man looked out. "Emma?" It was Farmer Henry, the older man whose farm was beside hers. He had been her late father's closest friend, and a fixture in her life for as long as she could remember. "I saw your truck, and I just had to investigate," he yelled from his truck. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this weather?" "It's a horse, Henry," she shouted back, her voice straining against the noise of the wind. "It is trapped in the mud, and I can't pull it out alone." Henry's eyes scanned the scene at Emma, coated head to toe in mud, and then he looked up at storm clouds rolling overhead. Without another word, he sped off in his truck. Emma's jaw dropped, but then she clamped it shut. She trusted Farmer Henry. He probably was off to get help. She turned back to the horse and began pulling again. They made little progress. The sky darkened further, and Emma's heartbeat became wilder. "Please, Farmer Henry," she whispered. "Do you think he will return?" The horse looked at her with sad eyes, and Emma felt like a failure. She decided to do what she could till the end. She had just adjusted the plank again to continue pulling when Barker began to bark violently. Emma turned and heard the sound of an ancient tractor. It was Farmer Henry. Emma ran to meet him, relieved. Without a word, he jumped down quickly and grabbed a coil of thick chains from the tractor's bed. His calloused hands worked quickly, unraveling the chain while he told Emma the plan. He would position the tractor as close to the mud's edge as possible, while Emma would secure the ropes and chains around the horse. The rain began to fall harder now. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, and the distant roar of thunder grew louder. It would turn the mud into a treacherous mess soon. Emma flew back to the mud, her hands trembling as she added the chains to her neck. There was no time to release the ropes. The animal's breathing had slowed, and its movements were now weaker. "Stay with me, girl, just a little longer," she whispered as she worked. Even with the howling wind and the rain, Henry climbed back into the tractor and started the engine. The machine roared to life, and its wheels spun slightly as they bit into the wet ground. "Pull slowly," Emma shouted to him. Henry eased the tractor backward, and the tension on the ropes tightened. Suddenly the horse's body shifted slightly in the mud, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. For a moment it looked like their efforts might work. But then the storm broke in full force. Thunder cracked like a gunshot, and rain became even heavier. Barker barked and ran to some trees. The mud seemed to liquefy, and it sucked the horse back into its depths in anger. "Henry, stop!" Emma screamed, waving her arms frantically. The tractor ground to a halt. "What's wrong?" "She's slipping," Emma yelled back. The horse let out a panicked cry, its body thrashing violently. One powerful kick sent a wave of mud splattering over Emma, knocking her off her feet. She fell backward, but she jumped up again and grabbed the ropes to keep the horse from going under completely. Henry jumped down from the tractor and grabbed the ropes too. Together they pulled hard and with all their strength. But their combined strength seemed barely enough to keep the horse from sliding deeper. "Don't let go, Emma!" Barker barked furiously at the struggling horse, as if willing it to fight. Emma's arms ached, and her muscles screamed in protest as she pulled with every ounce of strength she had left. The rain poured harder, soaking through her clothes and chilling her to the bone. The horse tried to fight, but when it kicked again, one of its hooves grazed Emma's leg. "Emma!" Henry shouted, lunging forward to stop her from falling. "I'm okay," she gasped, wiping mud from her face. Her eyes were locked on the horse. They were running out of time. "We need to stabilize her," Henry said. He grabbed the chains and looped them around the ropes for extra support. "Get back to the tractor. I'll handle this end." Emma scrambled to the tractor. She climbed into the seat and gripped the wheel. The rain blurred her vision, but she could see Henry's signal through the downpour. "Slow and steady," she whispered to herself, easing the tractor backward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the horse shifted. "Come on," she muttered, her knuckles white as she kept the tractor moving. Henry shouted encouragement, and she kept moving. Emma gasped in shock when she saw the horse's front legs shoot up and land on firmer ground. She was even more surprised when she noticed it trying to heave itself upward. This horse was a fighter, just a little more. With another pull from the tractor, the horse finally broke free, stumbling forward into the wet grass. Emma screamed in delight. She slammed on the brakes and jumped down. She even slipped slightly as she ran to the animal's side. The horse had collapsed on its knees, its sides heaving as it lay there, too weak to stand but alive. Emma knelt beside it. She rested a hand on its neck, feeling the warmth of its skin beneath her fingers. "We did it," she whispered, her tears mixing with the rain streaming down her face. "We got you out." "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she added. "I think I'll call you Storm." Henry clapped a muddy hand on her shoulder, his face etched with relief. "Hell of a job, Emma, hell of a job." They were both thoroughly soaked to their briefs, but they didn't mind. For the first time in months, Emma's heart felt light, and the pain was gone. Henry helped her drape a tarp over the horse to keep it warm while they worked to secure it into a makeshift sled. Barker hated the rain, but he didn't leave Emma's side. He watched intently, as if supervising their efforts. The loading process was painstaking. They had to be slow and deliberate to avoid hurting the horse further. Storm was exhausted. She remained still, her breathing shallow, until they finally got her into the back of Emma's truck. Emma climbed into the truck's cab with Henry and Barker. "You think she'll make it?" Henry asked. Emma only nodded. The drive back to the farm was slow because the roads were slippery and the storm did not help Henry's vision. But inside the cab, Emma felt a warmth she had not experienced in months. Barker licked her face, and she smiled for the first time that day. By the time they arrived, the rain had eased to a light drizzle. Henry and Emma carefully offloaded the storm, and then they led her into the barn. Emma was an experienced farmer, so it didn't take long for her to get a soft bed of hay ready with Barker's help. Barker helped draw the water and fill the horse's bowl. Storm herself lay down immediately after the hay was ready, and her eyes closed. Emma didn't leave her side. She used the warm water Barker had drawn to wipe away the dried mud that still clung to the horse's legs and belly. The grime was thick, and Emma could only imagine the pain the Storm had endured. So she whispered soothing words in Storm's ears and patted her. Barker lay nearby, his watchful eyes fixed on the Storm. Sometimes he would lift his head and check to ensure Emma didn't need his help. Emma smiled. The loyal border collie had been her shadow throughout this ordeal. As Emma watched Storm's chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm, a sense of peace settled over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt connected to animals again. She had lost that connection because she was trying to protect herself from another heartbreak. Saving the horse had reminded her that life, even in its harshest moments, was worth fighting for. The days following the rescue were grueling. Storm's legs were weak and she couldn't even stand. Emma had to spend countless hours tending to her and rubbing salves and creams into her sore muscles. But, as it turned out, it wasn't just Storms that needed saving. She realized how much she had changed since the day they pulled the horse from the mud. She no longer woke with a hollow ache in her chest. She no longer avoided the barn or the fields that reminded her of Orion, her late horse. She even found herself drawn to the very places that once brought her pain because of the storm. Well, news about the rescue spread quite fast. Henry told a few neighbors, and the story rippled through the small farming community. Soon, cars and trucks began pulling up to see the horse, and neighbors were even kind enough to visit with baskets of food and jars of homemade remedies. Children came to visit too, and they stared at the storm with wide eyes. Emma used the horse to teach them about resilience too. In the weeks that followed, Emma noticed a shift within herself. She began to wake with a sense of purpose. Her steps were lighter, and her smile appeared quicker. Even Barker noticed the shift too, as she was more eager to play with him. It looked like Storm's recovery mirrored her own, and that singular fact deepened their bond. One morning, Emma was by the fence of the pasture when she saw a Storm walking slowly into the open field. Her gait was a bit shaky, but it didn't stop her. Barker raced to the horse immediately and barked playfully, and for the first time Storm responded with a light trot. Emma laughed out loud in pure happiness and excitement, and the sound surprised even her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that, with unrestrained joy. She leaned against the fence and let herself soak in the moment. The final days of autumn came with crisp air and warm sun, but it also came with the Storm's complete healing. Emma too healed. Her life finally settled into a rhythm again, one that felt right. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she walked out to the pasture with Barker trotting beside her. Storm was grazing near the far end. Emma called her name, and the horse lifted her head. She began to move, but then her trot transformed into a gallop. Barker barked and took off after her. Emma stood and watched them run with a wide smile. The storm, both the one in the sky and the one in her heart, had passed. She thought of the day she found a Storm, the desperation in the horse's cries, and the weight of the mud that had threatened to pull them both under. It all seemed so far away now. This was a new beginning, not just for Storm, but for her too. This story is a good example of the power of resilience, both from Storm and Emma. It also shows that healing the world can help heal the hurts in our hearts. If you think this story of strength and determination moved you, watch our next video about another incredible rescue. Click now to watch.